Welcome everybody to AFSO21 Radio. You're listening to the Weekend Wrap-Up.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Weekend Wrap-Up here on AFSO21 Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Ferrara. And folks, for this episode, we're going to be discussing PFAS. And the reason for that is I am getting a lot of correspondence from firefighters out there, both military and civilian, municipal firefighters, that are really concerned about PFAS. And there's some things that are going on in Congress, locally here in Pennsylvania, and really, across the world when it comes to PFAS contamination. So, that's what this episode's going to be about. And, get ready. Hopefully it's going to be a good discussion. It's just going to be me. For this one, get some things off my chest, get some things out there to the audience, so you can stay abreast of what's going on. So before we do that, let's pause for a moment to hear from our sponsor, Fire Department Coffee.
Firefighters work long shifts. That's the nature of the job. If your station is like most, coffee is what keeps you going. That's why you should check out Fire Department Coffee. Veteran-owned and run by firefighters, Fire Department Coffee offers a wide variety of delicious coffee, including their signature line of spirit-infused coffee, all roasted by hand and delivered right to your door. Even better, 10% of net proceeds from every sale goes to benefit wounded, ill, or injured firefighters and other first responders. And they've got a special deal for the Weekend Wrap-Up listeners. Enter discount code AFSO21, that's AFSO21 at checkout to get 10% off your next order at Fire Department Coffee. FireDepartmentCoffee.com. That's FireDept Coffee.com.
All right, folks, welcome back. As I said, we're going to be talking about PFAS on this episode, and it's something near and dear to my heart. It's something that is affecting firefighters globally, and like I said at the top of the podcast, there's some things that are ongoing. That should be going, and then there's some things that sort of need a little bit of nudging to get that ball rolling in terms of eliminating the unnecessary exposure to PFAS chemicals. So one thing we're going to start here. One thing I recently been working with is a piece of legislation coming out of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And you're going to see me look back and forth here with my screens and everything. Those that are watching on YouTube, those that are listening on a podcast channel, just imagine I'm looking back and forth, at my multiple screens here. But like I said, one critical piece of legislation that's hopefully going to get a little bit more traction. It was introduced previously. It sat idle, didn't get much movement on it, but it's been reintroduced. And I'm talking about the Michael Lecik Military Firefighters Protection Act. Now, military firefighters, the name Michael Lecik. He was an outstanding firefighter who unfortunately passed away due to cancer. That we strongly believe was due to exposure to PFAS chemicals, whether it was through AFFF, contaminated drinking water, or turnout gear. We know those three things. You go to almost any military installation here in America, you're going to find PFAS contamination in one of those three. So, The Protection Act was introduced by Representative Abigail Spanberger, and I had the pleasure of reaching out to her office. I said, hey, Mike was assigned to Langley Air Force Base. He transitioned out just as I was getting into there, and it's something that, like I said, it's been being worked for a while now, far too long, in my opinion. It's a no-brainer. this act is meant to protect firefighters. And I just want to, I'm going to look at the text on this, and it's HR 2111, HR 2111, and it was, like I said, it was reintroduced to the 117th Congress, and looking at the text on here, March 19th of 2021, and there's multiple sponsors, who introduced the bill. Other representatives, congressional representatives that are jumping on board with this. But before I reached out to Representative Spanberger's office, I went through the bill, and it's not a long bill, and the crux of it is to establish presumptives for firefighters. So at the end of the day, if a firefighter develops cancer, is diagnosed with cancer, this bill, this act is intended to say, okay, based on their experience, based on their exposure, with some certain stipulations in there, we're going to presume that their cancer is associated with their firefighting duties and exposure. That's the act in a nutshell. There's other pieces of legislation that's being introduced out there that follows similar guidance on that. As I go through and I'm looking at it, there's a long list of 16 different things, actually 17, but 16. We're talking about heart disease, lung disease, brain cancers, leukemia, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, the various forms of cancer out there. And then that 17th line says, each additional disease, if any, that the secretary determines in regulations prescribed under this section. But one thing, and this act pertains strictly to military veterans. There's another one out there, the Neil Hogan piece of legislation, that's geared a little bit more towards Fed firefighters, civilian firefighters. This particular piece of legislation, the Mike Lecik Act, deals mostly with military firefighters. So one thing I notice on here when it talks about covered veterans, and I'm going to have a link on the podcast. You'll be able to access this bill. You'll be able to take a look at it, see what I'm talking about. So I would encourage you, at this point, if you haven't already clicked on that link, go ahead, take a look, click on that link, look at it, and follow along, as so you can see what I'm talking about. So when it talks about covered veterans, it says a veteran described in this subsection is a veteran who, one, is trained in fire suppression. Okay, we know most individuals out there, if you go through the DoD Fire Academy, if you are assigned as a firefighter, you're going to get that training. And then served on active duty in a military occupational specialty or career field with a primary responsibility for firefighting or damage control for at least 5 years in the aggregate. So, they're looking at, 5, that aggregate, that 5 years. So you may only do firefighting duties for 2 years, have a break. You may be doing some other additional duty. But then you come back and you do, another 3 years. Well, that's a 5 year aggregate. Okay. So that's what they consider as covered veterans. So you'll notice when they say damage control, that's more towards our Navy personnel, even maybe some Marines in there, Coast Guard. It basically it's saying you have to be almost assigned to firefighting or damage control duties to get this. Now we know in the Navy, we've seen the pictures, we've heard from veterans. Usually it's an all hands. You've got individuals out there, they're cleaning the deck with foam. They're, you get an incident on the flight deck. It's an all hands call. Everybody's jumping, in to help out. So even this is something we may have to look at because the way I'm reading this verbiage, those individuals that aren't, quote, qualified firefighter would not be covered under this. So these are the little things you got to look at in these pieces of legislation and talk to these representatives and say, hey, can we modify this? Really, this should almost be, anybody exposed to, to AFFF or PFAS. And there are pieces of legislation out there that are working on that. There's I think there's a toxic exposure one out there. It's not all inclusive. There are some, stipulations in there in order to be a eligible individual, should that piece of legislation pass. But, traveling down through this piece of legislation here, the degree of disability, they're saying specified in this subsection is 10% or more. So automatically, if this piece passes, it's going to start out at 10% and move its way up. Those familiar with the VA's disability rating system, you'll know there's a chart. They break it down as to the severity. The more severe, the higher the rating on that. This piece of legislation does not get into the weeds of talking about that. Now, this one here, this next line I'm going to read, this is one I was really pushing Representative Spanberger's staff. Unfortunately, she was not on the conference, the Zoom conference that we had. I'm going to do a follow-up, try to actually talk to her personally. Her staffers were great. They took a lot of notes, understood what I was conveying on that. And this is what I do, folks. It's, veterans reach out to me. They're like, hey, check this out. What do you think of this? And then I reach out to members of Congress. I keep pushing until I talk to somebody. I don't like email because it takes a while. Sometimes, it gets stuck in their spam system. I make phone calls and I do follow-up phone calls. So oftentimes, I may be annoying. I may be a pain in the ass until I get somebody on the phone. But that's really what we have to do. And I know for my fellow veterans out there, fellow firefighters, you've got things on your plate that need taken care of, personally, professionally. Let me go ahead, me and others in my network. Let us do the legwork. Let us, be that pain in the ass, if you will, to reach out to these folks. And we're, and like I said, when I call, I'm not an ass to these individuals that I talk to. We have, excellent dialogue back and forth. We agree, we disagree. We say, hey, let's take a little bit deeper dive, look into this, and then we'll get back to each other. So far, everything's been really, fantastic in terms of working with our congressional representatives. And, let's be honest, they have a lot on their plate as well. But that's no excuse. They are there representing, their constituents. A lot of their constituents are firefighters, whether municipal or military, and their families, so that's why, we need to get these pieces of legislation right the first time, so we're not going back, the next administration, the next Congress, and try to amend these, because trust me, folks, looking at the timelines on these, it takes years. It sucks. It takes years to get these pieces of legislation passed, because there's always some back and forth amendments, and often these pieces of legislations die on the floor until the next administration or the next Congress comes in, and then we almost have to start all over again. Meanwhile, firefighters' families, you can't hit pause with them. Illnesses don't stop because Congress doesn't pass things. So anyhow, not to ramble on about that. So like I said, one thing in its labeled period, it's down towards the bottom. It's actually paragraph E. It says period. The period specified in this subsection is within 15 years of the date on which the veteran separated from active duty naval or air service. So when I talked to Representative Spanberger's staffers, I asked for some clarification on that. I said, what does this 15 years mean? And I sort of had an inkling of what it meant. I just wanted to hear what they had to say. So they told me it's 15 years from when that member separates from active duty. So I said, now think about this. If Sergeant Snuffy, Airman Amazing, whatever you want to call this individual, they are an eligible qualified firefighter, damage control specialist, whoever they are. They serve their time. They separate after 15 years or at that 15-year mark. Okay? If they separate 15 years or earlier, they're going to be eligible should this bill pass. For whatever, they're going to do. Basically, it's just saying they're going to be qualified to file a claim. Like I said, this bill doesn't really get into the weeds of what will happen after that. So 15 years or less, they're going to be eligible. And I talked to the staffers. I said, now, pause for a second. I said, think about that veteran, that individual that separates after that 15 years. Okay? Now it says is within 15 years of the date on which the veteran separated from active duty. So if you get a veteran that when they separated, okay, and then 15 years and a day goes by, just one day, they go to their doctor, their oncologist, they get that news. Hey, Airman Amazing, Sergeant Snuffy, we've got some bad news. Unfortunately, you're diagnosed with leukemia, cancer, kidney cancer. And that oncologist, they're going to work with that individual, medical wise, for treatment. But that individual, according to this bill, would not be eligible to file a claim from what I'm reading. And again, I'm just going by the verbiage that's in here and what the discussion I had with the staffers. So, when I said that, they paused for a second and they're like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. I said, because think about it. I said, 15 years in a day. A lot of the veterans that I've been talking to that have reached out to me, I've got veterans 20 years, 30 years, 40 years after they've separated from the military and they're getting diagnosed. They either were or they're getting diagnosed with medical illnesses and or cancer. I said, so imagine those veterans, when they look at this bill, should it pass, they're going to be left on the outside looking in. They're going to be like, well, what about me? I served. I'm a qualified firefighter, but I don't meet that 15 years after separation. That's not fair. So the staffers totally agreed. They said, yep, we're going to go back to Representative Spanberger. We're going to discuss this, more to follow. I had the pleasure of Facebook messaging Mike's wife, talking about this, letting her know that, I'm going to talk about this on today's podcast. I wanted to let her know that, I support her. Thousands and thousands of my audience members out there support her and the family. We're going to do what we can to make this piece of legislation right. We're going to get it passed, and we're going to continue Mike's legacy and keep his name, forever out there, to protect other firefighters. Because I think that's what Mike was all about. Protecting his fellow firefighters, and moving on. That's a sacrifice that, unfortunately, nobody wants to make that sacrifice, but, I think we can develop a positive out of a negative, with Mike's experience. So, like I told his wife, I said, I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to keep on these representatives and other representatives I'm talking to about other pieces of legislation. And we can't keep kicking the can down the road, folks. It should not take, years to get legislation passed. Here we are June. I don't want to see this thing string along and then it goes nowhere. It dies on the floor, in the House floor. It never gets over to the Senate, never gets to the POTUS desk and gets signed. We need to get this thing passed today, but we got to, like I said, we got to do it right. So, if you're, the audience members out there, if you're one of those veterans, like I said, 20, 30, 40 years after you've separated, think about this piece of legislation. And again, I'm going to have the link. If you're not already following, please click on the link after this podcast, or even during the podcast. You can go back in, and it should open up a new window. Follow along. Obviously you can't do that if you're in the car. God, don't text and drive. Don't be scrolling on the phone. So wait till you get home. But yeah, take a look at this piece of legislation. Let me know what you think about it. Tear it apart. As lost my screen here for a second, folks. As one of my fire chiefs, he would always hand me documents and say, hey, make it bleed, get the red ink out there and just tear it apart, edit it, critique the heck out of it. Doing that, giving me that opportunity really has allowed me to look at these pieces of legislation. My nickname was F. Lee Bailey because it was always, that's what he always called me, because, I would always look at the liability, the legal side of it. That was the big thing when we were drafting policy procedures, is this thing going to stick? What's the legal side? If it's law, you got to do it. If it's policy is not law. So we wanted to make sure people did the right thing. And that's what we went after. So, documents, I would always make it bleed. And he would do the same thing. There was many a time I got a document back from him. I'm like, holy cow, was anything in there right? But like I said, that's what should be happening in the firehouses, folks. In your workplace is you should have a mentor that looks at things, a peer review, and looks at your documents, because it's only going to make you better as a technical writer, a reviewer. So when you get to those leadership positions, you can draft some solid documents. When you write to your legislators, you're pretty much doing the work for them. I found myself in that position, drafting proposed bills and things. There's templates out there, but yeah, you got to write it to, because a lot of times if you just write something, send it to them. I hate to break the news, folks, but most of the time they may not give it the time of day. They're going to be like, what is this person talking about? They'll hand it off to a staffer. If it's not a priority for them, it dies in their office. That's unfortunate. So, but yeah, like I said, take a look at this particular piece of legislation. Get back to me. Send me an email at contact@AFSO21.com. That's contact, CONTACT, at AFSO21.com. Put in the subject line, about this bill, and we're talking about HR. Let me scroll up here, folks. HR 2111, and it is called, make sure I get it right, it is called the Michael Lecik Military Firefighters Protection Act. But in the subject line, just put HR 2111. I'll know what it is. Let me know what your comments, questions, concerns are with that after you review it. If there's some things that need added to it, let me know. It's hard to get things added to some of these bills once they're in motion, but they can make amendments. because it's going to go from the House to the Senate, back to the House. So there is time before it gets to the POTUS floor. That's one thing I've been able to sort of comprehend dealing with Congress, is how this whole process works, where the red tape is, where the challenges, the roadblocks are, and try to circumvent those. So yeah, please, folks, get in contact with me. You can also find me on Facebook, AFSO21 Consulting, or AFSO21 Radio, the Weekend Wrap Up Facebook out there, which many of you have. You've reached out. You flooded my message box, my inbox, and I try to get in touch with everybody as best I can. If you sent me something and you have not heard back from me, it is not, I am not ignoring you. Please remind me. I've got my battle board. I've got my Post-it notes. It's just, I like I said, there's a lot on my plate. I've done it to myself. I have no regrets in doing it. But please remind me of things. Hey, follow up on this. What's the status on this? Sometimes I'm like, oh shit, let me work on that, and I get an answer back. So like I said, just keep in contact with me. I appreciate it. And then we'll move on from there. So as we talk about PFAS, another thing that military firefighters have done, and like I said, folks, in previous episodes, you've heard me talk about this. The 2020, the 2021 NDAA, mostly the 2020 NDAA has, they put that provision in there. They said, hey, we're going to do PFAS blood testing for military and DoD civilian firefighters. That's already started. They started that October 1 of 2020. So, we're not quite, we're not into a year of it yet. This is what I consider their test phase year. They're crunching some numbers. But what I've found, hang on a second, I gotta get a sip of my fire department coffee here, folks. Good stuff. What I have found with PFAS blood testing in the military are elevated numbers. Now, a lot of firefighters, they're getting their results back, and what they're telling me is, one, they don't understand the numbers, and it's not their fault. I didn't understand the numbers when I first got into looking at PFAS blood testing. But what's really concerning is that their doctors don't even know what the numbers mean. And they're saying their doctors don't even know what the next phase is going to include. Meaning, okay, you've got elevated numbers, but what do we do with those elevated numbers? How do we treat that individual? And you've heard me talk about with high cholesterol, diabetes, and everything. In terms of, you go get your blood work done, you get your lipid panels done, that whole gamut. Hopefully firefighters are doing that. It's in the NFPA standards that you should be. Military folks, that's automatic when you do your occupational health assessment or exam. So your results come back, you got a high cholesterol. What typically happens? Your doc's going to say, well, diet, exercise, let's put you on some medication to try to bring those numbers down into the normal range. That being the key term, normal range. Unfortunately, with PFAS, there is no magic pill. There is no diet and exercise. Once PFAS chemicals are in your body, they remain there for quite a long time. Now, depending on the amount of exposure that you have, depending on the PFAS chemical that you're exposed to, research has found that those PFAS chemicals can stay in your body anywhere between 2 and 32 years. That's why they are called forever chemicals. They don't naturally break down, easily. Every chemical out there has a half-life. PFAS chemicals have a pretty significant half-life. So, whatever your numbers are, today, you could almost say, well, let's double that, of what they were, from previous. Now, I have, me being the nerd that I am, I went through and I started tracking, some of the PFAS numbers. I had firefighters, and I put a survey out there. I've spoken to firefighters. I said, hey, if you don't mind, how about sending me your PFAS numbers, just your numbers. I don't need all that other stuff. And if you want to send it anonymously, you could do that as well. But I had to, I had a handful of folks, provide me some numbers here, and let me just drag this over here a little bit. I'm sort of looking at the camera, looking at the numbers here. And what I found, there's six PFAS chemicals that the DoD is currently testing for. And I'm just going to give you the acronym because the scientific name is pretty, it's a tongue twister. So the first one is PFBS, and of those that tested, I had nothing come back, so none detected. That's sort of the norm with that PFAS chemical. Then there's PFHPA. I only had a handful of individuals come back with that, with a detectable number. Nothing that would red flag it. And the way I have this spreadsheet set up is based on the NHANES geometric mean, which is really what they're calling an average. Anything past that number, I have it set up to where it'll red flag it. So this is where we start seeing the red flags come up. So PFHXS. So PFHXS. That number, the NHANES geometric mean, or what they consider as an average, is 1.180 nanogram per milliliter. Very small amount. So what we've found is almost all firefighters, I'm scrolling through here, with the exception of maybe one or two in here, were above the NHANES average for PFHXS. Now, I'm looking at the chart right now, and I've got firefighters that are, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12 times more than what the NHANES average is. What this particular chemical does to the human body, we really don't know yet. And that goes across the board with all of PFAS chemicals. When I first started this journey looking into PFAS, and talking to researchers and firefighters, individuals like Diane Cotter, Paul Cotter, who was really, one of the front runners on uncovering PFAS. I had no idea, what these numbers meant, what PFAS was. But during that time, and can't forget my environmental working group folks that are working behind the scenes, uncovering a lot of the contamination at military sites. What we found is back then it was like 4,000 PFAS chemicals. When I supported some testimony, that's what it was about 4,000. Now we're looking at, talking to researchers like Jamie DeWitt, we're looking more towards 10,000 chemicals in the PFAS group, the family group. And a lot of those really have not even been researched. We know they're out there, but there's not a lot of studies, especially correlation between those chemicals and firefighters that are being done. All of this really goes back to just a few years. I would say probably less than a decade, with firefighters and the impact PFAS has on them. We know from recent testimony the DOD is not even doing really any testing of their own. That was shown during a congressional hearing. Remember the hearing that I got bumped from, folks, before it happened? That's the one where we watched the DOD come back, and they, when asked by Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, he asked, what research, is the DOD doing, is the VA doing? And both of them really said, yeah, nothing. We're looking at, third-party research. We're not doing anything of our own, but yet they're getting millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to do research and testing. Well, what research are they doing? How to fatten their pockets with, contracts and everything. I mean, come on, it's that taxpayer money. Firefighters, their families are paying the DOD through taxes to do research and testing, but they're not even doing it. They're taking that money and using it for who knows what. So back to this chart. Like I said, PFHXS, that's the one I'm really monitoring, because that's the one that's showing the highest numbers out there amongst firefighters. Then we get into PFOA. Probably about half, 2/3 of the firefighters that provided me their data are showing elevated. Now it's not off the chart. The NHANES is saying 1.560 nanogram per milliliter. Most firefighters that come back were just slightly above that. I got one at 2.7. Well, there's a 4.8. So I mean, it's not off the chart. Then we get into PFNA. Only a fraction of firefighters come back above average on that. And then PFOS, and I'd say about 2/3, maybe a little bit more, are showing elevated levels on that. Now that average is 4.720 nanogram per milliliter, or nanogram per liter. And I've got 9.6. There's a 13. There's a 24.8, but I got a feeling that's a typo in there. At least I hope it is. And it, the scale varies on that. But again, folks, we don't know for certain what these PFAS chemicals do to the human body. Meaning, Sergeant Snuffy, Airman Amazing out there could be exposed to PFAS. So think of this scenario. You've got Sergeant Snuffy, Airman Amazing, and myself, or yourself. Put yourself in this group as well. We're all standing there. We all get slathered with AFFF, the same amount of concentrate, the same duration. Everything is equal across the board. You got 4 different individuals, but you've got equal amount of contamination. Fast forward 10 years. Okay. Sergeant Snuffy develops kidney cancer. Airman Amazing develops leukemia. I develop high cholesterol, diabetes, which I have. You out there, the audience member, you have nothing. That's what I'm talking about, folks, is that the human body, we're not drones. We're not clones. We're not robots. We don't think, act, react the same as everybody. That's why research is out there to see, based on our human composition, how our bodies are made up, what pre-existing conditions that we have, what is the average, the norm that's out there that says if you're exposed to this is what's going to happen to you. We really don't know that, and we probably won't know that for years. Talking to the researchers that I have, these research programs go on for years, sometimes decades, until they come up with a scientific hypothesis, a theory, some evidence. So it's like I said, I mean, and I'm looking at the data right here. There's individuals out there that were probably exposed, equally. Some developed, some didn't. It's just that's how the human body reacts. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have zero PFAS in our system. I mean, researchers like Jamie DeWitt, I mean, during our podcast, I mean, that's what she said. We don't want to have anything in our system because they're man-made chemicals. We should not have man-made chemicals, in our system. Our bodies should be absorbing things, natural products, natural ingredients, not chemicals out there that can negatively impact us. But one thing I want to talk about is you heard me say the half-life. So it's interesting in doing some research on my own here. I'm going to talk about PFAS, PFOS, and PFOA, and that's the two PFAS chemicals that the DoD was really targeting, over the past several years during the whole AFFF swap out. They went from a C8 foam to a C6 foam. We know the C6 foam still contains PFAS chemicals in it. It's not safer. Some folks have actually said it's worse than what the C8 foam was. Again, it all depends on research, who you talk to. But in terms of a half-life, so say you're exposed to PFAS, PFOS. And say today your level is 13 nanogram per liter. So that's what you're at right now. But the half-life is 2.7 years. So if you go back 2.7 years, potentially, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but potentially your PFAS level could have been 26. You go back 5.4, it could have been 52. It's just we really don't know. Again, it all boils down to how much of the chemical is absorbed into your system, and how your body reacts to it. Like I said, there's no magic pill. It's going to set in there. It's going to get into your blood. It's going to get into your soft tissues, your organs, all of that. And then at some point, if you're not, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, so I'm not trying to put fear in anybody's minds out there, but I've always said, and I tell people this all the time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When am I going to get sick because of my exposure to PFAS or PFAS? And when's my doc going to say, hey, Kev, we're seeing some things pop up here. Let's go ahead and look at that. Nobody, firefighters, we didn't ask to be exposed. Let's face it, we were lied to. People knew about it. They kept it to themselves. Some firefighters I've talked to, they feel like they're guinea pigs. We were test subjects. Let's do a secret test on these individuals. It's interesting. But going back to the blood testing, what's the DoD going to be doing with that blood testing, with these numbers? They're crunching numbers right now. They're getting a baseline for individuals. What's the next step? And like I said, a lot of firefighters I've talked to, they simply don't know. Their doctors don't know. They're left in the dark. They're reaching out to me. I'm trying to give them a little guidance as to what these numbers mean, what the acronyms stand for. And give them some hope out there. Like I said, I mean, just because you're exposed to it does not mean you're going to get sick. I want to put that out there. I'm not saying, no, I don't think anybody is saying that. Like I talked about before, it all depends on how your body reacts. Now, those that have listened to my podcast with Dr. DeWitt, Dr. Jamie DeWitt, she had said, let's not really concentrate on the numbers. Let's concentrate on the signs and symptoms that you're encountering, you're observing right at this moment. Things that are out of the norm for you. So if, a year ago you didn't observe anything, you were fit, healthy, all of that. But then this year, some things have popped up. Your lipid your lipid panel numbers are a little off. These are things that you should be discussing with your doctor, your healthcare provider, and then do some other testing. If for those on the civilian side, my civilian municipal firefighter audience out there, there are PFAS testing labs out there. Vista Analytical out in California is one of the leading ones out there. I just put their name out there because that's who a lot of folks go to. I've reached out to them, try to get some information. They test these the same 6 chemicals that the DoD is testing, plus they offer some other PFAS chemicals out there. And when if you contact them, and I'm going to put their link on the podcast description as well. When you reach out there, they'll tell you, say, hey, which ones do you want tested for? For the PFAS 6, it's probably about $650, $700 out of pocket on that. And the more chemicals you want tested, obviously the higher the cost is going to be. But yeah, they'll work with your healthcare provider and get it all done. You go into your doc, you get your blood work done, they send it off to Vista Analytical, they test it, bring it back, excuse me, and you'll have your results probably in like a couple weeks. One thing I talk to firefighters out there, no matter if you're military, DoD, civilian, or municipal, if you get a PFAS blood test done, that baseline, keep an eye on your numbers. Obviously the goal is prevention, reduce unnecessary exposure. But if you see your numbers go up at your next test, you need to be concerned because you have to cut off the source. It's just like with cholesterol. If your cholesterol numbers are going up, you gotta find a way to mitigate. You gotta, like I said, diet, exercise, watch what you eat, watch those numbers go back down. Same thing with blood sugar. If your numbers are going up, well, there's a reason. So you want those numbers to fall back and get in the normal range. Same thing with PFAS, folks. Find out what that source is, and then work prevention wise to reduce those numbers. Now we do know, thanks to Dr. Graham Peasley from Notre Dame University, that PFAS is in firefighter turnout gear. The longest time we've heard turnout gear manufacturers say, nope, there's no PFAS in our products. Well, research has shown otherwise. Now, with firefighters, there's no getting away from not wearing our turnout gear. And I am not saying do not wear your turnout gear. PPE is paramount to protect firefighters. That's your first line of defense. If you're not wearing PPE, you open yourself wide open, risk of injury or fatality. So make sure you're wearing your PPE properly. But the prevention comes afterwards. Once you're back at the station, actually before you get back to the station, make sure you decon your gear on scene. You get back to the station, decon the truck, take your gear, wash it. If it's contaminated, you're in a structure fire, chemical fire, whatever, make sure you wash it. Make sure you wash your gear on a regular basis, whether you used it or not, because Dr. Graham Peasley found PFAS dust. Your turnout gear is a fabric. it deteriorates when it's abrased. So, as it's rubbing against itself, you're doing training in the truck, putting it on against the skin, very small particles break off. Those small particles likely contain PFAS. You don't want to inhale it. You don't want to get it, cross-contamination. So make sure, decon, that's a big thing. When we hear the word decon, we think, oh, it's a hazmat. We got to decon ourselves out on the scene. No, it happens in-house as well. Good personal hygiene. Make sure you're cleaning the station. I know guys, when they say, hey, we gotta clean the station, you're like, oh my gosh, come on. We just did it. Okay. A clean house is going to be a healthy house. At least we hope it is. HVAC systems. If you haven't had ductwork cleaned, if you haven't had your HVAC system in your firehouses serviced, get somebody in there to clean those out. Make sure, because those PFAS particles, they're stuck inside the duct systems, the hoses, and then it's spread throughout the firehouse. We can go on and on and on about that. I think I've talked about that in other podcasts. So, just make sure that's what you guys are doing. So, the VA, when we talk about PFAS exposure, there is some talk about, the VA looking at, with claims on that, looking at their breaking news, it says VA plans expansion of benefits for disability claims for conditions related to certain toxic exposures. Well, that headline's a little misleading because once you start scrolling down, they're only talking about Agent Orange and particulate matter exposures during military service in Southwest Asia. Agent Orange, my gosh, how long has that been going on? How long has the DoD been denying, firefighters have cancer due to this, that toxic, matter, and, conditions right here. I mean, bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, Parkinsonism, similar to what, we're seeing with firefighters and PFAS exposure. So, again, as I said before, stay in contact with your legislators. Make them know your name. Whether you're a firefighter, you're a family member, you're a concerned citizen. That's what they get paid to do, folks. That's what they were elected to do. That's what they get paid to do, is represent you, not themselves. Oftentimes we see politicians get in there and it's, once they get in office, they got their little personal agenda and they forget about how they got in there, the voters. So, a lot of firefighters, they're sitting, outside the doors, outside the halls of Congress, and they're like, well, what about us? You said you were going to do this or that, and a lot of lip service, but we haven't seen anything. So stay on top of them. That's what I do. I try to stay on top of them as much as possible. So here in Pennsylvania, a recent article had come out from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection talking about PFAS contamination. And now we're finding here in PA, for the longest time, they said, well, our water systems are pretty good. There was only like 17 sites here in Pennsylvania that had PFAS contamination. Well, the findings have now shown, because they finally wrapped up what they considered testing of public water systems out there. What they found is about 1/3 of Pennsylvania's water sources have PFAS contamination. Now, what's interesting is here in where I'm at in Central PA, they tested 3 sites, and those sites do not provide the water to everybody in this county. And of concern is the major area where they should have tested, but they didn't, that area had a paper mill, and research has proven paper mills produce PFAS. They had what is still a Superfund site, a chemical site. There was PFAS there as well, and a lot of that waste was discharged into a local tributary, where it flowed downstream, and then during times of drought, they establish a pump system in that tributary and pump it back into the local community. So they never tested that water source. Why, I don't know. I'm still waiting on an answer from PADEP as to why they didn't. Not sure if I'll ever get an answer, but the data's out there. It shows where they tested and everything, where they didn't test. So that's another thing, audience members. Reach out to your local water distribution agencies out there and say, hey, have you tested for PFAS chemicals? Because really, up to the past couple years, up until the past couple years, nobody has really had a thought to test for PFAS. It wasn't on anybody's radar in the water systems. So now they're starting to test. Now they're starting to find there's contamination, and it's shocking. When I talk about paper mills, we found that they discharge with the waste that they have. They not only discharged it into the water stream, but the sludge, they ended up transporting that, and they used that in certain fertilizers. So, we know that it has occurred, up in Maine. They've found, the fertilizer up there has contaminated the farmlands, has contaminated livestock up there, and they've actually been able to trace back a little bit where that sludge came from, and it's like, oh, it came from a paper mill. Well, guess what? That paper mill had PFAS in it. So, not saying it is in there. But think about with your garden fertilizers that you may get at one of these big box hardware stores out there. You pick up that bag of fertilizer. You gotta be thinking of these things, folks. You gotta be asking yourself, where did this product originate from? Unfortunately, as I've said with firefighting foam, manufacturers are not required to put all of their ingredients on the label. So you may pick up something, and you'll see if maybe a few things in there, but PFAS probably is not going to be one of them. Because it's not a regulated chemical yet. We're working to get that done. And it also goes back to industry trade secrets. Companies love putting that out there. Be like, oh, well, if I put all my ingredients out there, I can't be competitive anymore. We can't say we're the best product out there. At the end of the day, I don't care, about industry trade secrets. I care about what's in that product. I mean, you grab a can of soup off the shelf at the grocery store. You want to know what's in that soup before you consume it, because you may be allergic to something, whatever. You want to eat healthy. You want to see what's in there. The same thing with our products, man-made products. We need to know what's in these products. Excuse me, folks. Let me get a drink here real quick. So that's where we're at with that. Let me see what else I got up here. Talked about that. We talked about that. Like I said, the VFW, looking at this page, there's a few acts that are out there, pending legislation. Let's see, those that were deployed to K2 in Uzbekistan. There's a lot of toxic hazards down there. So firefighters, aside from being exposed to PFAS, firefighting foam, turnout gear, they had open burn pits. They had depleted uranium, radioactive uranium, jet fuel. There was remnants from chemical weapons down there. For the longest time, the DoD denied those chemicals were there. Those toxins were there. Now, thanks to public peer pressure, that's being put on Congress, they finally recognize that. They're working on legislation. So for the veteran military audience members out there, if you were at K2, look up that. I'll make sure I put a link to that piece of legislation out there as well. Like I said, there's a lot of other ones out here. Here's the presumptive benefits for warfighters exposed to burn pits and other toxins act. Like I said, if for veterans, the audience members out there, burn pits, and this is really something that even the municipal firefighters need to be concerned with, because the military was burning pretty much anything that would burn at these forward locations, anything from fuel, clothing, plastics, to even body parts, just to get rid of them, biohazard waste. They would throw it in these pits, light it on fire, and get rid of it. For the municipal firefighters out there as well, think about what's in your local area. When you roll up to a fire, pause for a second. Don't just rush in there. Pause for a second. Make sure, you know what you're getting yourself into. And again, goes back to that decon. Another thing too is I talk a lot about is exposure reports. This is something that firefighters are, I found are lacking of doing, is when you go out on a call, it may just seem, like a mundane call. There's nothing really significant about it. You may be exposed to a little bit of smoke or whatever. Fill out an exposure report, because you have no idea what's in that smoke. You have no idea what that substance is. Get it in your med records. Keep a copy of yourself before you leave the doctor's office. Make sure you have a copy for yourself. You should have a backup of your medical records, because military folks, that stuff gets lost. And then that's a way of tracking, should something pop up medical-wise, God forbid cancer, years down the road, you can say, hey, I was exposed to such and such chemical on this date. Could that possibly be, a link to why I have cancer? So again, these are things you really, you should be thinking about. So, yeah, like I said, going back to where we started here with this podcast, the Mike Lecik act, I can't say enough, about Mike. I think all of his fellow firefighters, they truly miss, Mike being around, because and we tried to get Mike on the podcast. We were almost there. I was back and forth with Mike on Facebook talking about it. He really wanted to be on the podcast, but unfortunately, things occurred as they did. But like I said, I chatted with his wife. I said, hey, I'm going to keep talking about Mike, keep talking about the piece of legislation. Same thing with Neil Hogan. We're and other firefighters out there. We're going to get legislation passed. One way or the other, we're going to get it passed, and we're going to get firefighters protected. Not just military firefighters, but the municipal firefighters out there as well. Because while things are occurring, legislation is being done for military firefighters, and really where they're looking at is for the VA compensation. We cannot forget about our municipal firefighters out there, because they're probably exposed to more crap out there than what military firefighters are, in terms of you roll up to a structure fire or whatever, you have no idea what's inside there. Whereas in the military, They do a lot of inspections. They really crack down on, what's inside of a building, pre-plans, everything's documented. Municipal side, unless you're in a career department and you have a prevention program, a lot of volunteer departments out there, they don't do the inspections, they don't do the walkthroughs, they don't do the pre-plans. So, you roll up to a commercial fire, even residentials, we're not going to walk through and do anything like that, but you roll up to a commercial fire, you may not know what's inside that building. We've seen that in the news many a time. You think it's one thing, and then next thing you know, you've got all of this hazardous materials and other stuff stored in there, and you're like, what the heck happened? So one thing I do want to end up talking real quick, myself and several other firefighters, we had the opportunity to be interviewed by Sharon Lerner from The Intercept. And I'm going to put this link out there as well. I've already put it out there on social media. I've talked about it. So some of, audience members, you may know about it. But, she did a really great job. It was about a year in the making because COVID hit. She got wrapped up with some other stuff. But she ended up, wrapping up this interview and getting it published. The title is Firefighters Denied Coverage by Veterans Affairs After Exposure to PFAS Firefighting Foam. And it really highlights how the VA is rejecting claims. What we talked about before, throughout this episode, rejecting claims about our AFFF and PFAS exposure. And it's crazy because, the picture on the article, it's got Air Force Staff Sergeant Brad Creasy seen being doused by AFFF at Sembach Air Base, Germany in July of 1984. And Brad, provided that picture himself. And that's, folks, that's the shit that we did, as firefighters. We had no idea the stuff was bad. We had no idea the stuff was toxic. So here, you've heard me say, yeah, we used to spray kids with the firefighting foam. Well, here's Brad. You got a mop bucket, a steel mop bucket. Somebody's throwing foam all over him, and it looks like, I laugh because it looks like it was probably his going away. Looks like they had him tied down or tied to the picnic table. Folks, military folks are going aways, when we transition from one assignment to another. That was they call it hazing now. But that was the things that we did. If it wasn't foam, it was food. I think some folks out there got hit with dry chemical extinguishers, Purple K and all that stuff. So looking back at it now, it's like, what the hell are we thinking? But yeah, these things happen. But the article, like I said, it's Sharon interviewed me via phone. I talked about my training at Chanute, how, we would spray each other down, say, hey, it's just soap and water. We're perfectly fine. You've got Dan Kaysen, he provided some input on there about his cancers, what he's going through right now. Robert Gomez, he, looking at the article here, and I've talked to Robert, a few times as well. He's dealing with cancer, due to AFFF exposure. And the list goes on and on and on. And, it's the one in here, Sharon, of course, being a great, reporter, she got both sides of the story on here. And she actually interviewed or spoke to Gary, I think it's Kunich, Kunich. Hopefully I pronounced that last name right. But wrote in an email, says, quote, VA does not recommend blood tests to determine levels of PFAS in any individual because most individuals in the U.S. have measurable amounts of PFAS in their blood and normal ranges have not been established. And then the email goes on and on and on, the quote. But when they say normal, and he's somewhat right, folks, when he says normal ranges have not been established, but the CDC and Haynes reports that are published out there. So when for the military audience, military firefighter audience, when you get your blood test results back, it's going to give you look at each chemical that's tested. It talks about the NHANES, what those averages are in the year that it was done. And most of these, that report was, I think, from 2016. So they haven't refreshed their numbers yet. But it basically, as you dig through it, the actual report, it's pretty much telling you this is what they consider to be an average. But the VA, Congress, the federal government is not going to establish a true average, simply for the fact that once they do, the VA, anything past those averages or close to it, they're going to have to really look at claims and approving claims because of the exposure. And I keep saying it, it's profits over lives. They don't want to spend the money. I've said this to Congress. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. It all comes down to money. And imagine, folks, if every firefighter out there that was exposed to AFFF and has elevated levels of PFAS in their system, or have cancer or other medical illnesses, imagine if all of their claims were approved, how much money that would be to pay out. Because some of these claims, I mean, based on their cancers, they would be 100% rated. And that's for those that are in the know. I'm not going to reveal the numbers. I mean, it's out there, but that's you're looking at a large amount of compensation over time. And I don't think the federal government wants to do that, because if they do, guess what? Where's that money got to come from? Got to come from somewhere, and most likely it's going to be your taxes. So it's going to be an issue. One, I don't think is ever going to get resolved. Myself, other firefighters have flat out said, I think, and I'm not saying they're doing this, but this is the perception, is that the federal government is basically waiting for those that are sick to die off, so they don't have to deal with these compensation claims. But the fact is, the exposure is continuing, contamination is continuing, environmental cleanup is not even starting in some places or is effective. Until, again, it goes back to what I said about PFAS blood test. Until you isolate the source, contamination will continue. The same thing with your drinking water. Until you isolate the source, so you may have a contaminated area, but that contaminated area is leaching into a water source, and people are drinking the contaminated water. So until you do environmental cleanup, you're going to be drinking the water. You're going to be drinking bad water, just like I did at Cannon Air Force Base for 4 years. We polluted the aquifer system because of the foam, and at the same time, we drank polluted water. Didn't know it, but that's what happened, and that's what's happening at installations across the globe. And it's not just the U.S. That's dealing with it. I mean, Australia was dealing with it. European countries are dealing with it. That's why there's so much push on non-fluorinated foam, or finding really a true biodegradable, environmentally friendly, safe product out there. But it's tough, folks. It's absolutely tough. So I'm going to go ahead and post this interview out there as well. It's a really great article. And folks, like I said before, if you have questions, comments, concerns, you want to be on the podcast, you want me to bring up a topic, please reach out to me here at AFSO21 Radio, the Weekend Wrap Up. My email here is going to be contact@AFSO21.com. That's CONTACT at AFSO21.com. So that's going to do it for this episode, folks. I know it's a little long-winded. It's something that, we've been talking about, with the PFAS blood testing, PFAS. I truly wish it would go away, but, it's not. But I think together, whether you're a municipal firefighter, you're a military firefighter, you're a family member, you're a concerned community member, we all need to get involved. Strength in numbers is what I always talk about. And together, I think we can get legislation passed. We can start protecting ourselves. We can protect others. Because that's if we don't do it now, we're just kicking that can down the road. And I really do not want to pass this off to the next generation. I want to get it fixed while I'm still alive, while others are still alive, so we can rest in peace and say, hey, we saved the world. It's if that's even a reality. So hopefully, getting rid of PFAS does save the world. So with that, folks, that's, like I said, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. I get long-winded on some things, but it's, like I said, these are topics that affect not just me, but you, the audience members out there. So with that, until next time, I've been your host, Kevin Ferrara, here at AFSO21 Radio, the Weekend Wrap-Up. Please be safe. Continue supporting your local fire emergency services. And with that, I'm out of here. But before you close the box, make sure you give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and yeah, that's it. I'm out of here, folks.
Veteran-owned and operated AFSO21 Agile Fire Service Organization for the 21st century applies their extensive background in fire protection and emergency services to deliver support with identifying, developing, implementing, and maintaining strategies and techniques essential to operate and sustain an emergency response organization. AFSO21 services include staffing analysis, risk assessment, standards of cover, training, management, and financial reviews. AFSO21 is prepared to support your organization with increasing your capabilities values. For more information, please go to AFSO21.com. That's AFSO21.com.